And now we go to Jim, who's going to talk about genetic enhancement and all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. And I may get casually interrupted here and there by Morris, who some of you have seen walk across my screen. He likes to misbehave and draw my attention away from the screen. But anyway, so if you didn't like Sherry's talk, you're going to hate mine. Uh, so in essence, I'm thinking about inclusion and disability, and ultimately, my argument's sort of in the territory of thinking about what kind of society do we want to create if we're going to create a space society. And when it comes down to it, I see that as a pretty substantial undertaking, one that requires a pretty significant obligation on the part of the people that are going to be engaged in the act of founding that society. And so, I'm advocating for setting the bar kind of high when it comes to that. And so this question has come up largely spurred by Conrad. Think getting some of us to think about, well, if bioenhancements or modifications could enable, the quicker and easier settlement of space, if somehow we could relieve some of the pressure on technological systems in order to provide basic life support and things of that nature. Maybe this could open up space settlement or long duration or missions to the outer system on a quicker time scale. And so if biological modifications, things that could maybe help us, survive with lower amounts of oxygen or a greater range of temperatures, all these kinds of things, ultimately maybe the little green men that Caleb and Kelly talk about. So if this can help us do something we already agree we sort of have to do for compelling moral reasons, should we take this option up? And in particular, I wouldn't consider myself a bioconservative. Maybe I am ultimately, I'm not sure. But what I'm interested in are proposals where this is a sort of requirement, where the entire settlement is going to be designed around the fact that the entire populace has access to these modifications. So if you're not modified, you're essentially lethally disabled in that environment. And so in the process of this, I look at some ideas about what disability is and ultimately settle on the cultural model from Melinda Hall, which is going to locate the sort of main issue with disability as arising from stigma. And it's the stigmatization of forms of embodiment that ultimately is what disability is. And that if you try to look to biology for an account of disability, you're sort of not going to find it, because you're just going to see that organisms of a species come in different shapes and sizes. Sometimes the number of legs, appendages, and things like that are different, and there's no way it has to be. But in a culture, in a society, there are ways that bodies can end up that are regarded as good ways and regarded as bad ways. Folks are regarded as having the normal set of abilities, and some bodies are regarded as abnormal, but this normal abnormal distinction doesn't carve nature at the joints. And so if we're really serious about combating the negative experiences that disabled persons have, one of the things we've got to do is make sure that as we're making steps along the way to equality, we're getting rid of stigma, and that establishing a colony on Mars with the requirement of these modifications is just going to perpetuate that stigma, maybe even make it especially egregious in that society. And if our goal is to have human society expand into space, and in particular, all the people that would like to participate, if that's what we want to work towards, why not start sooner rather than later? And I think Sherry's got some good arguments about why the barriers that we think exist for disabled persons are more illusory than real when it comes to participation in space missions. And are the costs for this really going to be all that great if we do, rethink some of these things from the ground up? It's always cheaper to plan for accessibility from the start than it is to renovate later on. So the longer we wait to do this, the more difficult it becomes to do. And I guess with that, I'll pause my summary and just open up to questions. And extra credit if you know where I'm speaking from here, given my background. I'll say the sun is outside, but there's no kind of atmosphere.
All right, Chelsea, I'll let you go first.
Uh, Thank you. I do not know where you're speaking from, so 0 points for me. Thanks. I think I like exactly where you're going with this, and I think maybe that there's something even stronger that you can conclude from what you've provided here. So you talk about the kind of cultural model that disability is a culturally determined kind of stigmatization, and then this is coupled with this prospect of creating an entirely new society. And so when you call for inclusivity, right, including currently regarded as disabled individuals in this design, there's kind of a preemptive leveling up approach, I think, right? Make sure that things are kind of accommodating and build with disabled persons in mind now rather than renovating later. But with that approach in mind, I think that approaching in that way perhaps maintains this stigmatization and unjust hierarchy that we might have an unprecedented chance to get away from in this situation. And so what I mean, I'll just add a little like caveat that I understand that those who are currently regarded as disabled are not like a monolithic whole, but maybe there's an argument here for building the society with only people who are currently regarded as disabled in mind, like just them. And then to take that opportunity to form a society where all the physical and social structures support not just accommodations, but like the fundamental lack of stigmatization, such that persons who are regarded as disabled here on Earth cannot even be regarded as disabled in this setting, right? And so I think like the take-home point is that like maybe justice requires an even stronger conclusion, given that the opportunity here is for a brand new type of both physical and social structure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do I want to push that far, given what else I'm sort of committed to when it comes to space? And I'm not quite sure. I mean, I'd love to hear what Cherry has to say about this, because ultimately I do want to say the inclusion of disabled people is necessary for a few reasons. Assuming that you do share an interest in wanting to combat stigmatization. And I think part of it is just, non-disabled persons are not going to do a good job of creating an accessible environment if they don't have disabled persons there helping, advising, and things like this. And I think one of the things that Sherry hopes is this more inclusive society will help remove the stigmatization that non-disabled persons have. And I wonder if that aspect of it would be made somewhat less likely if you have a sort of disabled only colony. Because ultimately, I want
not disabled only, right? It becomes non-disabled only. It's just the people who are formerly regarded as disabled.
Yeah, indexicality. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess I wonder. That's just that's a really good twist. I got to think about to what degree I would want to follow through on each of the steps, but I can't work all that out right now, unfortunately. But no, thank you for that.
Okay, William.
Yeah, Jim, I'd like to respond to your initial remark from this morning, actually, this notion that if we were, unhappy with Sherry's talk, we'd be even more unhappy with yours. I think there's a similarity, right? Obviously, between your presentations, in the sense that for both of you, there are those who would be considered disabled on Earth, but would be considered useful in a space environment. But I think there's a difference, and this difference comes to where one might agree with one of you and disagree with the other, either way. That I think in Sherry's case, there are those who are disabled on Earth, considered disabled on Earth, and yet those particular qualities would actually become beneficial abilities in space. Whereas you're proposing that we have bioenhancements that would create those who would in fact become disabled on Earth, but beneficial in space. And there's this wonderful interplay, right, between biology and culture, I think in the sense that I'm thinking about those who wish to preserve deaf culture, right? That it's possible to have biomodifications for some folks so that they can hear, but they're resisting that because it would eliminate a culture that exists for them. I'm wondering what you think think about that?
I guess I'm not advocating for modifications. I wasn't sure if that was an unclear point. I'm saying they should not be required as a sort of barrier to enter into a space society. And I think I do agree that those that wish to exist in a culture like deaf culture should retain the opportunity to do so if they'd like. And so in sometimes I just want to say, yeah, I mean, those individuals should be welcome to join the endeavor. There are going to be some feasibility considerations there in terms of if you want to preserve a culture as a member of deaf society, you have to be engaged with other deaf individuals. So it would be difficult to be the one deaf person in the space settlement, even if it is genuinely accessible. You're not going to have that opportunity for cultural membership. So I think to the extent that there are interest in preserving cultural connections, that is going to have to be a decision that people are going to have to make in terms of, if there is an accessible space society, is it going to have the variety of human companionship that I'm interested in? And to me, a lot of these arguments push us to really try for bigger settlements rather than smaller ones. I mean, I think these very small minimum viable population proposals that people come up with to try to reduce costs as much as possible, they end up interfering with all kinds of other goals you would want to have with that settlement, be it, ensuring the continued existence of the human population. That's a lot tougher to do with a very small settlement, right? Joe talks about maybe 1 million being some kind of floor to get above to really have some dramatic impact on reduction of risk to human extinction. And I think when you talk about population sizes that large, that gives you all of the kinds of buffers that you might object to not having when you talk about smaller settlements that are inclusive rather than exclusionary. If what we're trying to do is preserve some of these cultural relationships that we think are important, which I think hopefully space settlement is something that permits, then yeah, I mean, I'm certainly on board with having representatives of deaf culture in my space settlement.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I guess I now understand that you're advocating for a sufficiently large population that has a diversity of differently abled people.
Well, I think that makes it easier. I think that the large population is going to provide for the range of opportunities that I think the absence of which is what really causes some ethical problems with space settlement. So I don't think that issue is one that's inherent to inclusivity on its face. I think there are all kinds of other issues, freedoms related to vocational autonomy, reproductive autonomy, that I think there are a lot of sacrifices that the fast and quick crowd are asking that culture to make. And I want to remind us that we're dealing with human lives here, right? And it matters how well the life goes for people that are living in our space societies. And these should be more rather than less attractive places to live. And it's, I'm trying to push for a good start for this settlement, one that's going to actually better facilitate its ability to realize goals, inclusivity among them.
Okay, Andrew?
I guess I think I misunderstood, because the opening of your video presentation seemed to suggest that colonization may well require bioenhanced individuals, and this would start to separate the colonized population from, ordinary people who hadn't been bioenhanced. And if any person did want to go or join the colony, they would have to be, undergo some kind of treatment. I mean, all you're saying about including an environment that accepts the disabilities is great, but I'm more interested in what happened. Who owns the enhancement technology? I mean, is it the proprietors of a colony? A kind of invest in bioenhancing all these colonies, and then do these people then? Is their labor no longer their own? That they're somehow owned by the proprietors, there's some kind of indentured laborers because of the advancement that they've been forced to undergo.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I start the talk out by, raising the argument that I'm responding to. So, I'm presenting, here's this perspective that says we ought to require enhancements because it'll help us realize certain space exploration or space settlement goals on a quicker timescale, and that if that's the case, we can bypass some of these other objections that have been raised in the human enhancement or modification debate. And what I'm saying is we don't get that sort of get out of ethical jail free card by just saying, well, it would help out space settlement. That, the quickest and easiest way to do something isn't necessarily the ethical way to do things, and that what would we lose or gain by waiting on a more inclusive possibility, and so then the objections become more about, well, how much more expensive does it become, how much longer do we have to wait, and my reply to those concerns is going to be, well, I don't think it's going to be exorbitantly more expensive, and it's going to cause that much delay compared to what would have happened if we just hadn't even thought about this enhancement thing in the first place. But then questions about, who would own the technology, who would profit from it, isn't going to alienate, even more people from their labor. I might share these concerns, but I don't have anything in particular to say about them, because my focus is just a bit more on cultural stigmatization as what we want to try to mitigate.
Okay, Carlos, did you want to ask another question? You seem to have eaten your Wheaties this morning.
Yeah, so for sake of argument, let's just buy into the cultural model of disability and focus on stigma. Well, I'm sympathetic to a lot of what you're saying, but I want to prod at the space between stigma and enhancement. There are lots of ways that we do human enhancement that don't bear any stigma, and it's possible to get rid of stigma and yet maintain enhancement. So it's actually quite normal in extreme environments here on Earth to require enhancement for some or all people. You don't go deep sea diving without scuba gear. When you go on an expedition in the Himalayas, they might use an oximeter, and depending on how well you've acclimatized, your expedition leader might require you to take Diamox or another high altitude acclimatization drug or something like that. There's no stigma to being the person on the trip who has to take Diamox, and there's no stigma to being the type of being who has to have scuba gear and go through decompression in order to do deep sea diving, right? And you might say, look, we can recognize all of the issues that Jim is talking about, but say the right thing to do is just to get rid of the stigma and not to throw the baby out with the bathwater by not mandating helpful enhancements for extreme environments. Just like you might say, look, the problem for people with chronic depression, it's a disability because it's stigmatized. We need to get rid of the stigma, but that doesn't mean we stop, we cut them off from their treatments, right? That we can end its status as a disability just by fighting the stigma, not by dealing with whatever medical intervention is, whether that's pharmaceutical or some sort of genetic modification or whatever you're thinking of when you think of enhancement. And it seems like, given that space colonization will involve extreme environments, that's the same attitude we should take. We can end the stigma without having to throw out enhancement as well.
Well, I would say it's a choice to view these environments as extreme in a way that would require some kinds of enhancements. I mean, we can build space habitats and habitats on other planetary environments that are accessible to disabled persons. I'd question the reasons why we would have to do this. I think we only get into a position where we say we have to do it because we've made some prior decision that says, we're going to pursue some strategy that's going to minimize the amount of, mass we want to send to Mars or elsewhere, that's going to limit what kind of habitat can be built. And so, in order to meet our cost restrictions, we just can't go with the settlement that had the ramps instead of stairs, sort of thing. And I'm just wondering, what that entire line of argument sort of presupposes about what the options were in the first place. And in particular, when we're talking about, founding a new society, that's a little different, I think, than, climbing a mountain in that participation really ought to be open to a broader set of people than those that just in particular have that strong desire, in part because you are going to have future generations of people that come into existence in the society. I'm also concerned about the range of opportunities that are available to future generations. So I know that doesn't quite exactly address the argument you're making here, the concern you're bringing up, but I mean, I think it raises this jumping off point that I would want to jump off at a bit earlier.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take our break.